Greetings, friends and brethren around the world. Jesus Christ is the head of the church, which he said, and not any man would build. Furthermore, and contrary to what any man may postulate about the prophecies of the Old Testament, this same Jesus Christ was the Lord of the Old Testament, and he inspired his prophet Ezekiel to write in chapter 8 and verse 6. He said, "Furthermore unto me, Son of man, do you see what they do? Even the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary? But turn you yet again, and you shall see greater abominations." In these verses, Jesus Christ is uncovering what was happening in the temple of God. Now remember, Ezekiel never went to Israel. He was a captive in Babylon. He wrote in chapter 1 and verse 1, "I, Ezekiel, was among the captives by the river Kebal, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God." Now this prophet's visions were for our day, and specifically for the end-time spiritual house of Israel, which is the church of God, or the temple, the spiritual temple of God. You know, Paul explained to the church in Ephesians chapter 2 verse 20 that they are being built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and Jesus Christ himself being the one that holds them together, the chief cornerstone. Brethren, the prophets of old have a very profound message for God's church today. Now let us continue and see what was uncovered in Ezekiel 8 and verse 12. That's Ezekiel 8 and verse 12. "Then said he unto me, Son of man, have you seen what the ancients, or the leaders of the church of the house of Israel, do in the dark? Every man in the chamber of his imagery? For they say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth." Now, brethren, we know nobody literally says that God doesn't see them. But what does God see? He sees their works and their plans which are revealed, which reveals a mind which imagines it can do whatever it wants to on its own. Remember what the devil said to Eve? "You won't surely die. You can eat this fruit. You decide. You don't need God to tell you what to do." And brethren of God, God requires us to see and to hear what takes place in his temple, in his church. This has happened today, brethren. And it is the spiritual temple that has gone far off from God, his sanctuary. And this has happened through the imaginations of the minds of their leaders who have scattered the power of the holy people. In Proverbs 14 verse 12 we are told, tells us about the imaginations of what happens with imaginations. "There's a way which seems right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." Jeremiah tells us about the heart of man. "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" But notice verse 10, Christ knows, brethren. It gives the answer. It is the head of the church who knows man's heart. Verse 10, "I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings," which is his work. The doings which Christ talks about in Jeremiah, brethren, is the power of the church in this Laodicean age, which has been scattered. Yes, you look, open your eyes and see. In Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 we are told, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swore by him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished." Now, brethren, what is the power which is scattered? Now, before we get there, you must first understand, we, all those who are in the worldwide church of God, are the work of Mr. Herbert Armstrong's hands. Everyone received the understanding of the truth, the understanding of the doctrines, the faith which is their belief today through him. How often did Mr. Armstrong say to us in a sermon or write in a letter, "You are my children in the gospel," or "You are my children in the Lord"? And brethren, you know well there are no exceptions to that. The problem with these scattered groups is they disagree with the government of God, which was restored to the church through that one man rule, that one apostle. These leaders are also fulfilling, yes, they are fulfilling, brethren, what we read in Judges 17 verse 6 and Judges 21 verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel, no one man rule. Therefore, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Do you get the point? There's no Christ nominated, no Christ appointed, no Christ led. There's no one man rule, and there's no Christ inspired leader among these confused groups. That is why they are split into so many factions and sects and groups, and have no idea why it has become that way. You know, today we are witnessing what Christ said would happen to the last era of his church, Laodicea. It would become scattered. And through that scattering, it would reject him, through rejecting the greatest doctrine that was restored to the church, which is his rulership through the government of God over you and over me. And by church I mean the spiritual organism, the ecclesia, which refuses to allow Christ to feed them. He tells us in Revelation chapter 23 verse 20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any of you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you, and I will sup with you, and you with me." Christ wants to feed you the truth once again, brethren. However, these organizations, these groups, these splits, they deny Christ by their works. Therefore, he stands outside of all of them. Christ did his greatest work through Herbert Armstrong, who fulfilled the prophecy of Matthew 24 verse 14 in building a spiritual temple. And that spiritual temple was to assist him in taking the gospel to the world. And of course, the principal magazine in spreading the gospel was The Plain Truth. And that magazine, at his death in 1986, had a subscription of almost 8 million and a readership closer to 20 million. The Church of God, the members, were fed through the Good News magazine, which by 1986 had a circulation of 840,000. The Tomorrow's World magazine was published in mid-1969 and discontinued in 1972. In that short period, it had a circulation of 875,000. The work of God in the 20th century had offices and hundreds of congregations around the world. In 1970, the apostle became known as the ambassador without portfolio for world peace. King Leopold of Belgium, in a solemn and subdued ceremony, or in a subdued voice, in November of 1970, honored Herbert Armstrong by saying, "I feel the very highest honor a king could present or to anyone who has contributed to world peace, not by making it through war or doing it through war, but through education, teaching millions worldwide the way to peace." In January the 16th, 1986, the door closed to Philadelphia. It was abruptly closed when the apostle died. And at that time, brethren, an exciting and vibrant Philadelphia era came to an end. And then what happened, brethren, is described by Isaiah in chapter 1. You can read the full verses from 3 to 6. The ox knows his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But spiritual Israel does not know. My people do not consider. A sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone far away backward. Now go read the rest, brethren. As I said, the greatest work. Yes, the greatest religious work ever done by an apostle of Christ was in the 20th century. And all of it done through and by the inspiration of Jesus the Christ. God, through Christ, gave the church, and I mean, brethren, by the church, the spiritual organism. And that's not everyone that populates these groups today. He gave them all the necessary doctrines to attain salvation and to become the bride of Christ. However, instead of using the tithes and the offerings of their members to prepare those members to become the bride of Christ, what we see today is these groups attempting to reproduce what Christ built and closed. And what are they doing? They are doing without Him being the head. Christ is not the head of those divided groups. And they have all produced what I class as a faded copy of the real work, which is totally out of sync with what Christ expects. Even though some of these groups have wasted millions of dollars buying and developing properties, yes, building campuses, auditoriums, having head offices around the world, TV programs, printing facilities to produce their own versions of the truth that was restored originally. You know, there was only one church, one group that had the tenacity or the determination to buy the truth, to buy what the apostle had already produced. However, because their leader thinks he's an apostle and a prophet, they still produce what they think Christ was or is inspiring. Daniel was told, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Notice, brethren, it is the power of the holy people that is scattered. The power. And that power, brethren, is described by Daniel in that verse today. They don't know. The church doesn't understand that verse. They don't understand it, brethren. Only the bride of Christ should understand it. She should understand what that scattering is. The angel is discussing the shattering of the scattering of the power of God's church. The word power is the Hebrew word yad. And that word means hand, the open hand, the organ with which you work with. It is the extension of your power. The hand is used to work with. The angel is telling Daniel that the work of the holy people in this day would be scattered. Yes, and just before the 3.5-year tribulation and day of the Lord. You know, as I said before in other videos, open your eyes to see the scattering. Look, brethren, look around. The church is scattered, divided. They only have produced a faded copy of the real work. And they are totally out of sync with Christ. Totally out of sync with what He expects. The Plain Truth and the Good News magazines were used effectively by the apostle. Today these groups produce their own. You know, Daniel was told to seal the book until the time of the end. The apostle John wrote this about the end time as well. Notice what John wrote in 1 John chapter 2 verse 18. Little children, it is the last time, or the last hour. As you have heard, the Antichrist shall come. Even now, there are many Antichrists, many who have rejected what Christ restored, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have no doubt continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest, that they were not all of us. The leaders have not continued with the truth they were taught and were expected to teach. Rather, they have gone out and scattered the church. And now, what has been made manifest or uncovered, as John wrote? What has been uncovered? It's what they are doing, brethren. You know, Jesus inspired John in Revelation 11 verse 1 to measure the church of God. which is the spiritual temple. Notice verse 1. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise, John, wake up, John, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. My dear brethren, that scripture is being fulfilled before your very eyes at this very moment. Yet those who lead groups, those who are leaders and are used in those churches, scoff at this work because they reject the government of God. And notice what happens in the church. Notice this, brethren, from Habakkuk in chapter 1, verses 4 to 5. Notice what Habakkuk was inspired to write. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment does never go forth. For the wicked does compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceeds. Yes, they have judged to scatter the church and do their own works. Therefore, verse 5. Behold you among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. And my dear brethren and friends, this is that work. And if you want more information, please visit our website, vigilancecog.com. So until next time, this is Michael Venish for Christ's marvelous and wonderful work, saying goodbye, brethren, and goodbye, friends.